research, and it's entitled Mac and Cheese, Edamame and Blueberries, How Kids Learn About Food Culture. Let's give you
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Christine. And thank you all for coming to my thesis presentation. So I decided to cultivate my interest in food and early childhood education and examine how we develop our food habits and values. And as you can see here, I conducted this research with preschoolers at Verner Early Learning Center, previously known as Mountain Area Child and Family Center, or MACFAC. And this center has a distinctive food program called Rainbow in My Tummy. But let's start with you guys. So tell me some foods that fit into the category of healthy food.
Apple, fruits. Kale.
That's it?
Quinoa.
Okay, great. So, and what about some unhealthy food?
Burgers.
Okay, yeah, that one seems to be a little bit easier for you guys. Definitely some trends in the responses that you guys just gave. And what about eating together? Is that something that you guys value?
Yeah.
Okay, and how about knowing where your food comes from?
Yeah.
Okay. So now let me ask you this. Why? Why are these foods healthy or unhealthy? And why is eating together important? And more importantly, what experiences shaped your responses to these questions and your current food habits and values? So from birth, we are gradually socialized into the norms, values, and behaviors that are associated with food and eating that are particular to ourselves, our families, and our culture. And for the rest of our lives, we are exposed to different food cultures and to an array of messages about food. And these messages become integrated into our own food value systems. And so, like I decided to look at this process with preschoolers and examine the two spaces where preschoolers interact most, home and school. And so I show how the food culture of children's homes and schools alike serve as critical sites through which food socialization implicitly and explicitly occurs. And I developed these questions to guide me through this analysis. What food messages characterize children's homes and their schools? And I also wanted to examine how teachers and parents interact with these children and serve as institutional authorities of these two spaces, and socializing children into understandings of food respective of those two spaces. And also, as Verner has a unique concerted food program with specific goals, I wanted to examine how the food culture of the school may or may not influence the food culture of children's homes. So why do this research with preschoolers? While you might have easily been able to tell me your food values and which foods are healthy or not, these values and this awareness is just budding in preschoolers. Their habits are the least well established compared to you as adults, and that's why it's so critical to examine just what preschoolers are hearing about food. And why study food? Well, when we review food from an anthropological perspective, we can see that food is much more than just 300 calories or a good source of fiber, for example. So food is also a cultural commodity, meaning that there are many cultural meanings and beliefs that become embedded in the cultural practice of eating. And next to breathing, these researchers say, eating is perhaps the most essential of all activities and one with which much of social life is entwined. So when we view food in this way, the meanings and significances that become associated with food and eating become infinite. And so turning to a brief theoretical framework, schools play an incredibly important role in the food socialization process. Children spend approximately 20% of their waking hours at school, and they consume 19 to 50% of their meals there. And food is part of the ecology of education that children experience at school. Meaning that just as schools teach about math, reading, science, social skills, schools also implicitly teach kids about food. This education is implicit in many schools, and I'll show how this teaching becomes explicit in Verner classrooms. And teachers also mediate children's experiences with food at school. So just as parents do in the home, teachers serve as institutional authorities of the schools, directly or indirectly teaching children about food culture. So when we review food and education as intimately connected entities that impacted an individual's relationship with food, it becomes clear that children learn something different when they eat in a cafeteria like this and learn about food from these posters that may or may not be in their cafeterias or from direct teachings from teachers. And when children eat like this, as they do at Werner, where they eat communally and share communal dishes and learn food as part of their regular education in the classroom, as part of the classroom. And this little girl is playing with banana and pineapple puzzles, so that those are just available in the classroom. And children's homes then represent yet another food culture. So like teachers, parents mediate children's experiences with food in the home and set a most important outer limit of children's experiences with food there. And parents also communicate various food rules to children that influence a child's relationship with food, such as, we want you to try a little bit of everything, or you can't have any peas until you have this, for example. And so why study both children's homes and schools? Well, Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, which you can see here, shows that we are embedded in multiple influential niches. So clearly we experience the day-to-day influences, such as one's home and school, and the very broad circles that you see here, like the socio-political climate within the broader circles. And each of these niches contextualizes the multitude of factors that influence an individual's food habits and values. So clearly I could have looked at any of these factors, such as particularly food advertisements in the media, economic class differences in food choices, and the nutritional content of food. But instead I chose to focus on schools and homes as cultural realms that children are embedded in most. So to conduct this research, I did participant observation in 3 classrooms at Werner, and this was with children aged 3 to 5½. And I totaled 11 classroom visits during lunch. And I also interviewed the 3 lead teachers of each of these classrooms and Bronwyn McCormick, the director of Rainbow in My Tummy, to see what sorts of food socialization they're engaged in the classrooms. And then with Pat Tuttle's lovely energy and help, I sat at this table in the MACFAC lobby, or excuse me, the Werner lobby for a week during pickup times. And I collected 54 survey responses from families. So that represents 54 of 91 families, 63 of 102 children, as children have siblings there. And so this is about 62% of their population. So to begin a typical lunch cycle at Werner, the kitchen staff brings one of these carts into each classroom with the food loaded on it and the plates, bowls, utensils, whatever the children might need during lunch. And then the teachers set the table while the children finish reading a story and then wash their hands. And as the children come to the tables to sit down, they can sit wherever they'd like, and they begin pouring their milk. Once everybody's gathered at the table, that's when the teachers introduce the food items and engage students in conversations about the food. Then the children start to pass the food items around to each other and serve themselves. So family-style dining and allowing children to serve themselves is an incredibly important part of the Rainbow in My Tummy philosophy. And mealtimes were a really exciting time to be at Werner. I heard children explore so many new ideas connected to plumbing and what happens after we eat our food, to Mr. Ruffles, the cat, to scuba diving, and to a pesky little baby bobby bird in the zoo, a story that they shared. So once the children are done eating, they dump and stack their dishes, and that's a process you can see here. So the children dump their food in one bin and then neatly stack their food in another. And indeed, the tables sometimes get rather messy and spills do indeed happen as children serve themselves. And now just to give you a little teaser of some of the foods that I got to enjoy eating with the kids and some of the foods that they regularly eat, and you'll probably get hungry. I hope you do. So I got to eat barbecue chicken, salad, pineapple, and rice, mac and cheese, broccoli, and blueberries, one of the favorite meals of the children. Split pea soup, asparagus, steamed potatoes and pineapple, pizza, carrot sticks, mixed berries, and then one of my favorites was chili, sweet potato salad, and then cheese. And as you can see here, there are many colors on this slide, and that inspired the program's name. So by the end of the week, the children will have eaten a healthy diet and had a rainbow of colors in their tummies. So what does this all mean? And what are children learning from this process? As Andig and Sellerberg write, mealtimes are a time for teaching children about food and certain behaviors related to food and eating. So I now provide you with a description of the values and expected behaviors that Werner teachers communicate to their students during mealtimes. So firstly, a huge tenet of Werner's food culture is encouraging the children to eat a wide range of foods. Teachers prompt each child to at least put each food item on their plates themselves. If a child doesn't want a particular food item, then the teachers encourage them to take a no thank you bite. And this was a practice that my mom instituted when I was a little girl too. So basically, the children are asked to put a really small serving of the undesired food on their plate. So even if it's just say 3 peas, for example. And each of the teachers that I interviewed told me that they believe that the children were more likely to eat the food if they put it on their plate themselves. And Katie, one of the classroom teachers, shares this quote to illustrate this point. So remember, they're choosing what they put on their plate. And once we see them do that, we'll say, all right, I saw you chose to get some broccoli. And as soon as they get one bite, I'm like, well, what did you think? And they're typically like, I didn't like it. And I'm like, well, thanks for trying. So in Rachel's classroom too, she gave a lot of praise when the students tried something that they didn't think they were going to like. She often said, congratulations, you tried a new food. You didn't think you were going to like them, and you did. Kiss your belly. And then they kiss their bellies. Part of exposing children to a wide array of foods is also not withholding any items from the children. So if a child is only choosing to eat bread that meal, which is a highly preferred item, I observed, the teachers may prompt him or her to try different things. But ultimately, the teachers will not force children to eat certain foods. And Leanne, one of the classroom teachers, shared the following. So one of the things that's really important with the Rape in My Tummy program is that we don't want to value any food over another food. So we don't want to say, you can't have any more oranges until you eat whatever, because then we're holding oranges up here on a pedestal, and we want to keep all foods equal. But at the same time, we want to encourage them to try a variety of foods. This practice also communicates that teachers also value independence in making food choices. And this is a topic I discuss in more detail in my thesis. Teachers also spoke of the importance of establishing a positive eating environment, and the hopes that students will associate healthy eating with a positive community. Rachel explains that she often redirects the children if they're starting to misbehave, and she highlights that if they experience a positive atmosphere with this healthy food, then they'll start to associate healthy food with playfulness, fun, positivity, community building, and friendship. And research has supported this idea and shows that children who eat communally more often eat a healthier diet than those who did not eat regularly together. The teachers also value meal times as a time to model and teach positive connections between peers. So each teacher mentioned that they love to see their children staying at the table after they had finished eating and having conversations with each other. In my thesis, I also discussed how Werner teachers encourage food awareness, both in terms of engaging students in conversations about food sources and critically examining just what is in the food that they're eating. And going back to Weaver Hightower's views about food and its place in the broader education that children receive, it's important to recognize that Werner teachers make this learning explicit through the processes that I just described. They very consciously cultivate the aspects I've discussed into their children's school lives, not just during the meals. So for example, they incorporate food into dramatic play, into puzzles, and as you can see here, into an examination of seeds with magnifying glasses. As Katie so aptly states here, it's something we do throughout the whole entire day. So this is just another component and another place to practice it. And it was clear to me that the kids understood and, for the most part, accepted this lunchtime practice. Sometimes children would regulate each other, for example, if they were misbehaving. And I rarely saw a child fuss or get upset about taking a no thank you bite. As researcher Ann Allison puts it, what was once externally enforced now becomes ideologically desirable. So these practices become commonplace and comfortable for the students. So turning to an examination of children's homes, I draw upon Ann Allison's work with Japanese mothers and obento boxes, which are meticulously prepared lunch boxes that you can see here. Allison argues that mothers and the home are regulated by the school and teachers' comments about these obento boxes. Instead, I argue that Werner families experience a two-way interplay between the home and the school, so they're both connected. So parents at Werner interact with food the Werner food culture in a number of ways. 78% of parents reported that they read or sometimes read the weekly menus on my survey. And you can see a picture of those here, and those are posted in the Werner lobby every week in the children's classroom. And 31% of those parents talk with their children about these menus. 72% of parents also read the quarterly Rainbow in My Tummy newsletter, which you can see here. This one is about the different types of fats and also provides a new recipe that parents can prepare in the home. So the parents have direct access to direct information about Rainbow in My Tummy. Additionally, 87% of parents indicated that they have conversations with their child about what he or she ate at the end of the day. And most of the parents described those conversations similarly to this parent here, just asking them what they liked or didn't like. And interestingly, all the teachers I interviewed at McCormick indicated that they do not have much direct contact with the parents about their school food. So it seems that children, too, carry their home and school cultures with them into each of these spaces. Just like parents read the newsletter and the menus and get ideas about how to structure food in their home, children, too, serve as an important entity in this interplay. In fact, 47% of parents reported having prepared a food item at home because their child told them that they enjoyed it at school. This parent's quote emphasizes how Rainbow in My Tummy has encouraged them to make different food choices at home, directly because of what their child told them. Parents also had overwhelmingly positive things to say about Rainbow in My Tummy, as evidenced in these quotes. I provided a blank space on my survey for parents to share any additional comments, and 57% of parents filled that space with positive comments similar to these. Then, what sorts of food practices do children receive at home? There were several significant continuities in how children eat at school and how they eat at home. For example, 92% of families eat together regularly. And 81% of families reported that they eat together at a table. And interestingly, 31% of those, that 81%, indicated that they do so without any distractions, such as TV or cell phones, and I didn't even ask about this question. So the majority of families eat together like they do at Werner and value this time together. I also asked parents if they had any techniques to encourage their children to eat certain foods, because Werner was so intentional about how they did this at school. And 20% of the parents specified that they encouraged children to at least try each food item, which is clearly in congruence with the Werner philosophy. But this is also clearly not the majority of children's experiences at home. So there were also components of students' home food cultures that differed from Rainbow in My Tummy's practices. 77% of parents reported that they typically use 3 or more techniques to get their child to eat a certain food at home, and such as using dessert or a preferred activity as a reward. And some parents, as you can see, were very creative in how they did this. I love that last one. Perhaps the most interesting finding of the survey results was that only 19% of families reported regularly using family-style dining. The majority of families, 66%, reported that one person prepares the plates in the kitchen and then brings these into the table, which is clearly, as you can see here, yet again, different from what children experience at home. So each child experiences the interplay between these two food cultures in their own ways. But as I have summarized here on this slide, it seems that most children's home food cultures are rather similar to Werner's. Children engage in spaces that typically value trying new foods, healthy foods, and a shared community of eaters, among other things. So, like I said, Allison argued that the schools directly impact children's homes through the teacher's scrutinization of mothers' preparation of bento boxes. But I argue that there is more of an interplay between these two spaces, with teachers, parents, and children all playing a role in the food socialization that occurs within home and school. I'm not arguing that one food culture is superior to the other, or that one food culture is more influential. Instead, it's important to recognize that these food discourses teach children not only about how to eat and what to eat, but also the social significances that the cultural practice of eating holds. Given the recent awareness of rising rates of obesity in our country and the ensuing focus on health interventions, consider this: food is not just food. We must consider the social contexts that influence an individual's interactions with food. We must consider both health and nutrition science and the factors that influence an individual's food identity. My work with these preschoolers demonstrates just how complex these two food cultures are and how they shape an individual. Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge Christy and CT for their direct help with this project and all of the anthropology department. And Pat for her enthusiasm in my project, and Catherine for her help with my survey, and all of us who are in this together, all of the people in this class, and Tamlin for his support, albeit your anthropological or your scientific mind, my mom, and of course all the staff, children, and families that helped with this process and welcomed me to their class.
When you were observing the kids, did you ask them questions about what they thought about the mealtime?
Yeah, I kind of, initially I tried to be sort of a fly on the wall in that regard. I really wanted to see just what they were doing at school without me intervening at all. But eventually I realized that I became really invested in the kids, and so yeah, I definitely, I would grab the dish and help them carry it to the, to their plate, and sort of engage with them that way and ask them, oh, would you like to try anything else? Because I see you're eating food or eating bread. So I kind of picked up on some of those things and got invested, like most anthropologists. Yeah.
Have you found research that shows that this type of program is becoming more prevalent in schools, especially preschools?
Yeah, actually, part of Bronwyn McCormick, the director, part of her job is to help other preschool centers implement this. So yeah, this program, Rainbow in My Tummy, has been implemented into 14 other early childcare centers in the county, and they're starting to move into McDowell County also. So yeah, definitely, and I think that they're hoping to spread it as far as they can. And I've had dreams of it spreading to every single school, so obviously that would be ideal, right? Yeah. Yeah.
You find that there's a lot of parallel values in the home and at school.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's any, or if there are a few families that have different values or different cultural background, so that their values might be different from the values that are instilled.
Yeah. Totally, and I did hear parents share some of those sentiments, but they were definitely not the norm. In reviewing the surveys, it was definitely overwhelmingly positive. There was one mother who indicated that she felt very restricted by the Rainbow in My Tummy food program, because no outside food is allowed to be brought into the schools. And so she expressed having very high standards for her child in terms of organic and GMO-free and that sort of thing, which Rainbow in My Tummy doesn't explicitly focus on. And I also asked one child, so yeah, I did ask something, one child I noticed rarely ate any food at school during lunch, and I asked him, well, what do you eat at home? And he expressed, smiley face French fries and, other sort of frozen prepared kind of foods. So definitely, but like I said, that wasn't the majority of parents' experiences or children's experiences. So, yeah.
Yeah, one of the many really irritating things about American children as compared to kids in France or Brazil or other societies is how American kids seem to get socialized into this notion that children's food is different from adult food, and also that they are individuals with their own unique tastes. They either like or don't like everything, as opposed to places where kids eat what their families do.
Right.
So do you see how in the American food culture that you're identifying, any of that socialization happens or towards that, or is contested in some way?
Yeah, and I think that Bronwyn, the director, actually really kind of explicitly targeted that question, and she spoke of the kid food culture and how Rainbow in My Tummy kind of directly combats that. And so, like I said, as children are just establishing these food ideas, they serve them these sorts of foods in order to kind of usurp that that culture that they might become embedded in. And interestingly, also, only one parent mentioned this, but she wrote on her survey that she thought that the foods were not age appropriate. And so again, kind of sharing that idea. But that's, like I said, kind of directly what Rainbow in My Tummy combats. So.
Any others?
Yeah, go ahead.
In writing your thesis, did you research any sort of barriers that some schools might encounter in trying to enact programs like this?
That's a really good question. I definitely, yeah, I definitely read several articles about implementing different health interventions, and particularly like community gardens and that sort of thing as a way to teach kids about food. So definitely, I think, community resources is a big thing. And also, as I was saying, the importance of recognizing like each individual's unique social position as it relates to food. Some people don't care about these health interventions, and especially with kids that are this young, when they're going back and forth between these two worlds, if it's really going to become seeded into their experience, continuity is a huge thing. So for some schools that parents might not feel quite comfortable with the school, that would certainly be a barrier. So, yeah.
Do you see any limitations in the kids that neglected to eat the food at school because of like parental things? Are they then excluded from the other kids that are like indulging, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I actually asked one of the teachers who was the teacher for that child that I mentioned about the smiley face French fries, and she said that she still really encourages him to come to the table and engage in that social process of food. Because like I said, they also really value that kind of social time and the special time that can happen with peers at school. So sometimes he was usually one of the first years to get up and leave because they let them do that whenever they want. So they were still involved in it, but they I would assume they approached it differently, kind of personally. Yeah. Yeah, Danny?
Did you look at the demographics of the families and the children?
I did. I received that data from the center in aggregate. I didn't specifically ask any of the families about that because I wasn't interested. Honestly, I kind of just wanted to see what they were doing irrespective of that. And I actually just looked at this a minute ago. Yeah, so the majority of the families are white, which is, you can probably assess. And the majority of the families, I think it was 40% of the families, the highest level of education within their home was an advanced degree. So that's really interesting. So the population is obviously really educated, and there are certain values that come along with that economic and social class. And Werner also draws, I checked these numbers too, they have 16 children that are involved in early Head Start classrooms, but they also draw students that come from various economic backgrounds. So they are intentional to draw that population in as well. Yeah.
Okay, now that we're all hungry, we're going to move on to music. Our next presentation is from Nora White. It's entitled, "We Can't All Go to the Same Church of Old Time Music: Identity, Community, and Authenticity Within the Genre." Nora.
Thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate you all being here for research. As Christy said, the title of my thesis is "We Can't All Go to the Same Church of Old Time Music: Identity, Community, and Authenticity Within the Genre." I came to this research from a pretty personal place. I started playing the fiddle when I was 7. I took lessons and I primarily played Irish music until the summer when I turned 15 and I was introduced to the world of old-time music. When I started at Warren Wilson, I quickly found a home in the music department. I've been very happy there ever since. I'm also a traditional music minor. When it came time to pick a topic for my thesis, music seemed like a really natural choice. I've chosen to weave my anthropology major and my traditional music minor together for this capstone. Music as a tool gives people personal power over identity and identity expression. Worldwide, music is frequently influential on cultures' identities. For this research, I focused exclusively on how individuals living in the Southern Appalachians employ American vernacular music in such ways. I address notions of identity construction and maintenance indirectly through several different lenses. The first of these is what motivates people to start and continue to play music. Second is how people engage with other musicians and what the resulting old-time music community is. And lastly, I ask people about their specific definitions of what authentic old-time music is. I've separated out the ideas of self, community, and authenticity for the purposes of clarity, but I'd like you all to recognize and know that these ideas are interconnected in innumerable ways throughout my research. I think you'll see that. My research is entirely qualitative and was done through both personal interviews and participant observation. My participants are a collection of people I currently play music with, musicians I specifically sought out because of their notoriety within the old-time music community, and people who responded to solicitations that I put out on both the Warren Wilson Appalachian Music L and the Asheville Potluck Listserv, which is an email list for old-time musicians in this area. I had 13 interview participants, 7 men and 6 women. All of my participants are currently living in the Southern Appalachians, either Tennessee, North Carolina, or Southern Virginia. My participants ranged in age from 20 to 67, and the majority of my participants identified as white or Caucasian. This research is definitely limited in scope due to both the short amount of time I had and restrictions on travel. This time limited how far I could go afield and how many interviews I could do, and because of that, my participant pool does not recognize or represent all old-time musicians. Identity associated with music can be in relation to or in opposition to larger cultural movements. These musical identities are used to express personal ideas about morals, interests, and activities. Michelle Duffy is one theorist whose work I've used throughout my research. She notes how musical expression is used to create feelings of belonging and association with other people. Identity with a fluid art form like music allows people to grow and change through that identity. Martin Stokes' work is also influential on much of my research. He addresses individual musical identity in a mass scale, and he comments on how music as an art form evokes powerful ideas and feelings about space and history. An example of this would be if you hear a certain song and it immediately reminds you of being 13 and in the 7th grade again. This ability of music makes music a powerful social organizing tool. These theories influence the personal beginnings of musicians' identity construction. I began my exploration of how individuals create and maintain musical identities through questions of what motivates people to play old-time music. Many people initially mentioned base, visceral, internal feelings of obsession, addiction, and a love for the music and their physical practice. People frequently expressed feeling drawn to the music in a way that was inexplicable. Many of my participants also mentioned early formative experiences of musical parents, friends, and community, or an interest in the music and culture and a desire to connect with that. These mental and physical experiences of my participants opened music as a mental and physical way of expressing themselves and personally motivates them to continue playing. It is impossible for me to discuss old-time music without discussing community, because for everyone that I spoke to, playing with and learning from other people was an essential part of their musical identities. Thomas Torino's participant observation in the old-time music community highlights the participatory nature of old-time music and the function of community. He uses the term cultural cohorts, or groups which allow people to form individual and communal identities existing on the edge of mainstream culture. In such groups, alternative lifestyle practices associated with the scene draw people in, and the physical activities and space perpetuate community building and active identity construction and maintenance. Aaron Fox is an ethnomusicologist who conducted research among working-class country musicians in Lockhart, Texas. He observed how making music can serve a community by creating spaces for them to express frustration and hardship while also celebrating. He argues that music helps people to exist within society. Erin Marshall was one of my participants, but she has also conducted graduate research in West Virginia examining the connection between the vocal and fiddle traditions in that area. Her work highlights the importance of history and community in creating and reproducing old-time music through the folk learning process, whereby musicians learn from other people and traditions are replicated. I will discuss the influence of history and heritage more in a few moments. For all of my participants, as I said, playing music with other people is a central motivator for continuing to play. This community engagement happens in several different ways. There exists a large circuit of festivals and camps that happen annually. The Swananoa Gathering on our own campus is one of these. Many people also participate in public or private jams regularly, and many people play in bands or groups that they may perform or record with. A sense of acceptance, encouragement, and ease among fellow musicians is fostered in all of these community spaces and was evident in every space I visited during my research. As you can read in these quotes from Geller and Seng, finding and participating in the old-time community brings great satisfaction. Both of their quotes highlight Torino, Fox, and Marshall's ideas about the function community plays in the old-time world. Old-time music clearly creates camaraderie, and this motivates people to continue engaging. I heard these same things expressed again and again by my participants. Community came up in a number of other ways through my interviews as well. The first of these was the way that music is incorporated into someone's life in many different ways. As you can read in this quote, participating in the old-time music community is sometimes about much more than the music. The music is a vehicle for relationships and can be used to build and rebuild those. Music is frequently ingrained in all aspects of an individual's life, central to their relationships, travel experiences, work, family life, etc. Sense of place is a common anthropological idea connecting physical spaces to people and culture. Old-time music is historically rooted in the Southern Appalachians, but technology has advanced so that the music has been spread around the country and even around the world. This has resulted in a potential loss of regional styles, but has increased the different regional practices and approaches. In particular, my participants who have lived out of the Southern Appalachian region commented on different community approaches to dance and how musicians also engage in dance. Dance has also historically been connected to old-time music. Buck dancing or clogging is frequently used as percussion accompaniment, and community square or contra dances are also associated with the music. But in particular, several of my participants mentioned a difference between the West Coast and Asheville dance scenes. Asheville has a very active contra dance community, but it's not commonplace for the dancers to be closely connected to the music and vice versa. This is not the case on the West Coast old-time communities that my participants experienced. Concepts like the folk learning process and the need for community to perpetuate old-time music led me to ask participants about their thoughts on the community-centered nature of old-time music and how that creates a positive space for musicians to both publicly produce and consume the music and culture. Johnson's quote gets at this community ethic with the idea that old-time music is compelling because it is both unmediated and accessible. My own thoughts on this idea have been shaped by an early exposure to the DIY punk scene thanks to my dad. And I heard this same connection articulated when I interviewed Michael Ismario, and he brought this up unprompted. I'd like to read you this quote from Ismario because his words illustrate my point about the production consumption ethos of old time in a really beautiful way. The connection between old time music and punk rock is that both cultures have this really strong desire for unmediated experience. In the punk scene, there's even an acronym, DIY. There's this whole movement and understanding and philosophy around not just being passive consumers and not just buying the tickets and standing there while someone entertains you and clapping and going home. It's all about being engaged, making your own music, controlling where your music is made, displayed, created, all that stuff. And it's exactly the same in the old-time world. It's all about sitting down with other people and playing music, rather than just going to the store and buying a CD and being a more passive consumer. It's a really strong ethic. Within the old-time world, there's that same kind of ethical philosophy of common music. We're not here to exploit it, it's not okay to exploit it, and if you do exploit it, you'll get a tongue lashing. As a young person, this community ethos of accessibility and alternative values of consumerism is something that I actively seek out throughout my own participation. It's been wonderful to find that in a multi-generational community like Old Time. I experienced these ideas of accessibility and participation in both production and consumption of the music throughout my research, and I heard it numerous times in interviews, if not quite so explicitly as Mario described it. History of old time music is probably the most accessible literature on the genre and covers a wide variety of intersections. Connections between old time music and work songs, songs describing work and making song as work, the stylistic shift from old time to bluegrass and the continuation of both genres, the media creation of the hillbilly and the hillbilly character and how that has romanticized and stereotyped Appalachian life and music, and profiles of specific well-known musicians. Because such a large body of work documenting the history of old-time music exists, I found that it came up in my research in a variety of ways. Historical narratives associated with the music and culture solidify and maintain the cultural identity and legitimacy of the culture. Preserving history through song titles, lyrics, and narratives associated with songs and tunes is common in the old-time music community. Many of my participants talked about how they love this part of the music and feel that it is a significant part of their community and practice. But I would also like to note that this preservation has highlighted and prioritized specific cultural characters and tropes while actively leaving out others. And the folk revival of the 1960s. This was definitely an influential movement on some of my participants. This movement encouraged many people to take up instruments and start bands, while also perpetuating and shading some of the historical preservation through more commercial avenues. All of the ways in which the history is documented and employed by old-time musicians hugely affects what individuals consider authentic old-time music. A main part of my research was collecting participants' definitions of what authentic old-time music is. I felt it was important to do this rather than using a set definition because, as a musician, it allowed me to be more objective. While collecting these is important for understanding the old-time community, it is important to recognize that these ideas are influenced by some important theories and ideas about authenticity. Benjamin Feinstein's thoughts on authenticity in music highlight the role of middlemen, such as record producers or DJs, and marketing, which limits and defines what should initially be presented to audiences to even be judged as authentic or not. This material is then entered into a cycle of prioritized reproduction, which increases the value of anything considered to be authentic. And this idea comes from Walter Benjamin. Martin Stokes also identifies the power of authenticity as a concept within music. He finds that definitions of authenticity are maintained by communities because those definitions contain strong ideas of what the music and community stand for. This is also connected to his idea of authenticity within the music as a social organizing tool. Throughout my interviews, I noticed a variety of themes which my participants connected their definitions to. For the purposes of explaining these, I've chosen one quote from interviews that exemplifies each theme, but each theme was supported by more than one participant. If you have more questions about a particular theme, please let me know at the end. The first of these is historical roots. You have to know the tradition to be authentic in the tradition. You have to know the boundaries before you can push the boundaries or even know if you want to push the boundaries. Historically, old-time music sounds a certain way for a reason. Having an understanding of the history is seen as key to making authentic old-time music. Active listening. When I talk about music that doesn't sound as rich to me, and you could perceive that as authentic, it's the watered-down versions where people aren't listening very deeply. Active listening to old-time music and digesting that through one's own practice changes how someone plays and connects them to the surrounding musicians and community. Stylistic markers. A lot of people think old-time music is really simple. A lot of people just hear the melody. It's because they're not hearing all of what's happening between the notes. The bow pulsing, the bow rocks. People often simplify. Since old-time music is a specific genre, certain sounds and stylistic markers are necessary for the music to even be judged as authentic old-time or not. For some of my participants, a deeper understanding of how and why things are played a certain way was seen as necessary. Active community participation. What makes something authentic is the fact that it's happening. People care about it, and there's an invested group of people who are putting their energy out. Because the music has been so community-oriented for so long, it makes perfect sense that musicians felt like this was an important aspect and crucial to the music being authentic. Evolution of the music. I think that's the beauty of the tune and the musicians. The musician has the liberty to have his or her own style to apply to it. Therein lies the authenticity of the tune, its ability to change. All of my participants felt that continued innovation and change was important in the music. Because old-time music has so many links to the past, it could easily become an antiquated practice. But old-time music is very much a living history practice, incorporating the past into an evolving future. And lastly, music as language. This was the most surprising theme to arise out of all of my research. I had numerous participants make analogies between music and language without my inclusion of a prompt or question about such an idea. Some of the analogies they came up with were music as a language, learning a new language, communicating through music, ideas of fluency, acceptance and understanding through music. The fact that for these musicians, playing music is as central and natural to their lives as speaking denotes both how important playing is to these individuals as well as how much of a process it is. I think that this idea illustrates the larger context of musical identities and how these can be both so central and so daily in a person's life. This natural feeling is at the core of my participants' definitions of authenticity. When you are no longer worrying about it, that's when it starts to be more authentic. All of these themes bring together the ideas of self and community that are so central in my research, as I was telling you at the beginning. It's really hard to take them all apart. The old-time music community operates as a subculture, a group within the larger culture which holds its own values, beliefs, and practices. The function and need for subcultures speaks to a societal need to find meaning and position within the larger culture. Old-time serves this purpose fully. Old-time also serves people by acting as a living history, collecting stories, keeping traditions alive, and making history tangible. My work opens doors for others to ask questions about why tunes are played the way they are, how people come together around the music, and the purpose subculture movements such as this can have within the larger context of society. As Martin Stokes' theory discusses, music is a powerful social organizing tool on both the individual and communal levels. The fact that so many people identify with old-time music and music in general makes it an important social activity that should be considered and researched. The idea that music is language shows just how powerful a tool music is and how crucial it is to communicating ideas, building relationships, and preserving history. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Do we have questions?
I was wondering if you could comment more for the audience about the section in your thesis in your presentation about the romanticizing that happens with old time, and you mentioned that some stories get highlighted over others. If you could talk more about what informants had to say about that.
Yeah, I think, like I was saying, like the history of old time music is definitely really accessible, and lots of people are familiar with the Mountain Rube or the alcoholic hillbilly. So those images are really popular in popular culture, and it's easy to find those. I definitely think that that influences how people may be perceived as old-time musicians. I think the way that it is romanticized for some of my participants and commonly for people in the old-time music community is through Torino's idea of cultural cohorts. So part of his definition of cultural cohorts is that participation in those allows people who may have a 9-to-5 job to then participate in an alternative culture on the weekends. And that culture engages alternative lifestyle practices and values that they may also value but can't incorporate into their daily lives. So romanticizing like a back to the land movement, which can also be associated with a roots culture like this, happens through something like that as well. Kevin?
Great job.
Thank you.
I like your discussion of authenticity, and I was wondering if commercialism or consumerism was also, I don't know, a part of any of those things.
That's something I was curious about too in asking these questions, because I know the idea of, well, one thing in Michael's comment about punk, the relation between punk and old time, he talked about how in punk there can be like bands that sell out by signing with a big record label and becoming big that way, but that they become something that's kind of different. One thing I heard expressed by a lot of participants is that old time is not really a genre of music that's likely to be really mainstreamly popular. If it could have gone further and been exploited further, by now it probably would have been. So the level of exploitation that exists now is probably about as far as it's going to go. Everybody that I spoke to was really comfortable with the idea of recording and performing and that kind of thing still being authentic, because it's frequently throughout history been an entertainment-based music as well. So people didn't have a lot of concerns about selling out because it doesn't seem like that much of an issue or a possibility for the genre in many ways. Katrina?
Yeah, you talked a little about the importance of the DIY aspect of it. Do you think that it's a genre that's less accessible to people that aren't musicians because of that?
No, I think it's more accessible to people because of that aspect. I think as a musician, I'm always really excited when other people tell me that they want to learn how to play, that they want to take up an instrument, that they want to hang out and listen. I think that's the community feeling that I find throughout it all. I didn't speak about this much in my presentation, but all of my participant observation experiences were through people just inviting me because I was doing this research, because I was asking questions, to come to their jams, their private jams that they had, to go to a birthday party and hang out with people. And in all of those spaces, I instantly found community and people that I could talk to because of the fact that I'm a musician. And because I had my instrument and I could bring it with me, and I was willing to sound bad and just try playing with them anyway. So I think it makes it more accessible. Any other questions? Julie.
Hi.
Hi.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
The response you had to Katrina was actually just the question I was posing, which I know from my relationship with you that you have some really rich stories from your data collection. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind like just sharing, like giving us like a little window into what you experienced at like one of the jam sessions or birthday parties. Because I know you told me that like people were just totally welcome and invited in.
I think one of my favorite things that happened was that I got invited to a private jam that happens in somebody's CPA office here in Asheville. And he said, he emailed me from the Asheville Potluck listserv that I put out, and he said, I'd really love for you to come. I'm really concerned about the privacy of the people that play here. We're really a closed group. We ask people not to bring their families or to bring an entourage. Can you come and talk to me? And so I went and I talked to him before an evening when he was having this, and he was totally down and excited about it. And so I came back a couple hours later, and I was the youngest person in that room by at least 35 years. And I kind of was like nervously sitting on the side. Well, first I came in and he was like, here's the coffee, here's the beer, the whiskey's in the top drawer, have fun. And I was like, okay, great. So I kind of sat in the corner for a minute, and after I'd been sitting there for a couple minutes, I threw a couple tunes. Somebody was like, well, are you going to even play with us or not? And so I got my instrument out, and I ended up hanging out with them for several hours. And even though I didn't really know any of the tunes they were playing, they persistently asked me to start tunes, would jam in on what I was playing. We're just really encouraging, and he emails me every time they're having that jam now. I've been too busy to go back, but summer's about to start. Ben?
In this paper, you focused your research on community in this region largely that's often associated with this kind of music and face-to-face interactions. But is this subculture or community also a kind of global community? And if so, how do people in this community here look out at other kinds of, or people who participated in other parts of the world, or vice versa?
It is definitely something that the internet has helped to spread around. One of my participants, Erin Marshall, is actually a Canadian, and she's very well known as an she originally played Irish music and now plays entirely old-time music, and she's well respected and well known as an old-time musician. There's also definitely international movements. I think with the advance of the internet and television, the music through some of those more romanticized commercial avenues has been spread around the world. I have never found anybody to be unwilling to accept musicians from other places. Jeff.
Good job as well. And along these same lines, though, I'm curious about, well, for Ben's class on subcultures, actually, I went in and talked about identity and old-time music, and it was quite fun to think about. And, you know, I've come to see it as a pretty splintered thing. In your description, it seems more like you're seeing these unifying elements. But I'm curious if you, the closer you got to old time in terms of thinking about it, even talking about authenticity emerging from symbols that have been mass-produced, and yeah, it starts to, it's almost disquieting, right? When you start to realize, oh gosh, this is kind of like almost a mythology we're all agreeing upon. I'm wondering if you've seen it grow closer together and therefore seen more commonalities, or if you've seen it kind of blast apart and you're more confused about like making generalizations regarding the genre.
I was pretty uncomfortable from the beginning about making generalizations, which was why I chose to ask people what they thought instead of, as a musician, I have my own ideas about what I would play and consider authentic old time and not, but I didn't want to bring that into it. So I think that my definition and my view is broader now. I think I'm less concerned about it. So many people were more concerned about your feelings and your practice around it than what the actual sound coming out of it was. And it was much more about that ethos of common music and it being something that you can play and that you can share, rather than it being something that, I mean, like as Mario said, like having it be something that you just go and pay for and then leave, but having it be something that you have a dialogue and an interaction around. So I feel like less restricted, maybe. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
All right, our last presentation is from Lauren Williamson. It's entitled Mediating the Clinical Gaze, a focused qualitative analysis of American acupuncture.
Nice. Nice. All right. Well, my name is Lauren Williamson, and I would first like to thank everyone for attending this year's edition of Capstone Carnival. And congratulations to all the presenters. The title of my thesis is Mediating the Clinical Gaze, Focused Analysis of American Acupuncture. This year I've been conducting my senior research on American acupuncture in the greater Asheville area. I focused this research on incorporating and highlighting the importance of patient experience within assessments of medical therapy's effectiveness. The efficacy of acupuncture is generally evaluated through quantitative means, and I seek to contribute to the growing body of literature that incorporates qualitative elements within measures of acupuncture's beneficial outcomes and therapeutic effectiveness. As the title of my thesis indicates, I seek to reconcile the dehumanizing separation of the patient from the clinical encounter through incorporating this patient experience into such assessments. So in order to get the intended purpose of this research, I've developed 3 broad research questions, and they include: who uses acupuncture therapy and why? How do patients and practitioners conceptualize the efficacy of acupuncture? And how does the biomedical community conceptualize the efficacy of acupuncture? So let's begin. What is acupuncture? Acupuncture is generally a medical treatment that is labeled as complementary and alternative medicine, or CAM. CAM therapies themselves usually split up into two main subgroups, these being natural products, which mainly consist of herbs and vitamin supplements, and mind and body approaches. Some of the more popular mind and body approaches we may be familiar with include yoga, meditation, massage, chiropractic, and acupuncture therapy. Broadly speaking, acupuncture is an ancient medical practice originating in China that involves the insertion of thin needles into specific points along the body in an effort to correct the flow and balance of qi throughout the body. Qi is generally understood as the life force or natural energy common to all living things. Essentially, it is the essence of life. The body is understood to be healthy and balanced when the qi flows freely through the body, while various illnesses and disease are believed to be the result of blocked or unbalanced qi. Qi has been likened to the concept of prana within Hinduism, vitalism within Western thought, or more popularly, the Force, as depicted in the Star Wars saga. The term CAM is indicative of its relationship to conventional Western medicine, or biomedicine. Biomedicine functions widely as a dominant system in relation to which other systems try to legitimize themselves or from which to differentiate themselves. CAM therapies are, in light of such, defined by and contextualized through this relationship to the paradigm. As its name indicates, CAM therapies are used either as an alternative to or in conjunction with conventional medicine. And, well, using CAM as an alternative to biomedicine is quite uncommon in our modern society, but there is a growing consumer trend utilizing these therapies in conjunction with Western medicine. Over the past 4 years, the past 4 decades. Almost half of all Americans have used some form of CAM therapy, and in 2007, 3 million adults had used acupuncture therapy. The growth was largely consumer-driven, and due to its increasing usage among the American adult population, funding and research for measuring the clinical effectiveness of acupuncture and other CAM modalities were initiated, including the creation of a governmental agency now known as the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine. The creation of this governmental agency, along with the growth in lay usage, is indicative of the growing cultural legitimation experienced by CAM, but the process of integration into the national healthcare is wrought with complications. So before we stray too far, who are these people that use acupuncture therapy? What are some of the predisposing factors of this population? According to the literature, there is a specific audience that is attracted to acupuncture as medical treatment in the United States. 78% of this population has obtained some higher education. 82% of them are white. 65% identify as female. This population tends to have a poor self-reported health status, and they have been noted as holding more spiritual beliefs and disposition. Most of the patients that use acupuncture are reported as seeking relief from a specific medical condition. And generally, these individuals have not had success with conventional Western medicine. So this research has collected data from 14 total participants. 3 of these are acupuncturists, while the remaining 11 are all patients of acupuncture. Of these 11 acupuncture patients, 7 identify as female, 4 identify as male. All of these participants have attained at least some college education. And all except one participant identified themselves as white, and the same participant was the only one to hold more religious than spiritual beliefs. 9 of the 11 acupuncture patients in this study learned of acupuncture through either personal relationships or physician referrals. 8 of these 11 patients used acupuncture for a specific medical condition, and of these participants, all but 1 reported that their therapy was successful. We will discuss some factors and how they determine the efficacy briefly. Shortly. It is interesting to note that the 1 participant to see no improvement was the only participant that did identify as religious. The remaining 3 participants that have not used acupuncture for a specific medical condition use them either as a preventative mechanism or just out of personal interest in wellness practices. Therefore, their conceptions of the value and efficacy of acupuncture will be a bit of repair. These participants were recruited through person-to-person solicitation and through flyers that were posted in 10 participating acupuncture clinics in the greater Asheville area. Once contacted, semi-formal qualitative interviews were conducted in various places through Asheville. Each of these participants gave themselves a pseudonym in order to protect not only their identity, but the confidentiality of their medical history. Participants were interviewed about their general experiences with acupuncture, including the reason for getting acupuncture, frequency of their treatments, the relationship to their acupuncturist, and how they determined if these treatments were successful or not. The participants were also interviewed on their experiences with conventional Western medicine, particularly if they have a specific medical condition that they sought both forms of medicine for. These interviews ran anywhere from 1 to 3 hours. Some limitations of the research include the small number of participants. Due to this, I don't feel comfortable making generalizations about all patient experience, particularly due to the fact that this research mostly collected data from people in Asheville who were white and had some higher education. This research also did not have access to participants who, for whatever reason, have ceased to use acupuncture therapy, which is a pretty huge limitation. So for the purpose of this research, efficacy can be understood as the capacity of a treatment, such as a procedure or a substance, to generate a desired clinical outcome. Essentially, an assessment of the efficacy of the medical treatment, the question asked is, does it work? A majority of literature regarding the efficacy of acupuncture is the product of biomedical research, and as such, all the evidence produced is conducted through quantitative methods paired as a pathological focus. In their evaluations, biomedical research has essentially asked, is acupuncture an effective biomedical treatment? And a central conclusion from former qualitative studies on patient experiences show that these outcome measures measured in clinical trials tend to be too narrow. So biomedicine is the dominant underlying belief system of medical practice in the West. This paradigm arose in conjunction with the emergence of the scientific method and subsequent application of that method to the further understanding of the human body. This approach underpins research and medical practice within the United States and much of the West, and is responsible for major medical advances in diagnosis and treatment in the last few hundred years. The focus of biomedicine is primarily on pathology, diagnosis, and treatment. It is assumed that all stimuli produce like effects, and that illness can be separated from its social context, including the patient themselves. Theoretically, this is a positivist understanding of illness and disease, which basically means that empirical knowledge and generalizations can be made from the perceived objectivity of standardized scientific texts. This process, known as evidence-based medicine, or EBM, is implemented to assess the safety, efficacy, and cost-effectiveness of various medical treatments, along with the degree of integration into the national healthcare system. And interestingly enough, although this process is standardized, reports of the efficacy of acupuncture remain a controversial issue within EBM debates, which helps to shed light on the complex, multifaceted nature of efficacy. Such scholars as Maya Goldenberg and Christine Berry have noted the difficulties when applying positivist methods to human behavior and illness, and further, that the arena of medicine is itself a social construction. Kuhn's seminal work, Structure of Scientific Revolutions, calls into question the objectivity of the scientific method. It brings to light the cultural and historical forces that have led to the development of these methods, and asserts that the production of knowledge is a social as well as scientific process. So given the inherent problems in notions of evidence, preoccupations with evidence as the preferred basis for good medicine can be seen to constitute a form of rhetoric. Through this research, I have found that biomedical reports on efficacy and safety are not the main indicators of use. And moreover, evidence produced by Western science and biomedicine holds little weight among these participants. Their evaluations of what works in acupuncture therapy are of a different nature and quality, and it often transcends the physiological mechanisms that characterize conventional assessments of efficacy. In regards to safety, participants in this research, along with much of the biomedical research, understand acupuncture to be a relatively safe form of medical therapy. Participants in this research, however, were more skeptical of Western medicine. All of the participants in the study revealed an aversion to pharmaceuticals and a preference for more natural products, while 4 of these individuals used acupuncture in an attempt to safely counteract the adverse side effects of their prescription medications. Instead of these biomedical reports, this population tended to rely on experiential or anecdotal evidence, as witnessed by the referrals that had originally led them to seek acupuncture. 10 out of the 11 patients of acupuncture in the study include non-specific therapeutic effects and general pleasurable sensations derived over the course of treatment as factors when evaluating acupuncture's efficacy. Because EBM measures the degree of intervention within a medical practice, non-specific effects from acupuncture do not hold much value within this context. But dichotomizing the effects of acupuncture into, or any medical treatment for that matter, into specific and non-specific components ignores the major point that pain or illness is considerably more than physical sensory experience. It includes deeply affective qualities that impact on behavior. All but one of the participants that sought acupuncture for a specific medical condition note that with the use of acupuncture, they are able to better handle their condition, even if their original complaints, such as pain, persisted. So in assessments of efficacy, both the form and content of the medical treatment contribute. The mythological, ritualized, and culturally embedded aspects of all healing systems, biomedicine included, can in themselves possess great healing potential in both effective and affective ways. This research has found that the aesthetics of acupuncture, along with the relationship developed between the patient and their acupuncturist, are central to patients' constructions of efficacy. And all of these elements are part of the embodied experience of the patient within the clinical encounter. Within the clinical perception shapes social interaction and affect patient impressions of their treatment. 9 of the 11 acupuncture patients interviewed introduced the topic of aesthetics when speaking of acupuncture, indicating its importance within the healing context. And the appeal of these spaces is exemplary of the transformative potential aesthetics can play in patient constructions of treatment efficacy. The aesthetics and material culture of acupuncture clinics, as well as the routines of interaction that occur there, can also serve to distinguish it from conventional clinics. Kevin Anderson credits these clinics as drawing on constructions of naturalness, authenticity, and medical holism, while balancing oppositional associations such as medical professionalism and medical austerity. As Desjardins finds, the configuration of material culture and atmospheric elements intended to impart a quasi-exotic and semi-formal clinical environment is a way to grasp and tie together the tacit themes that shape cultural constructions of bodily and social interactions. Historically, acupuncturists consider the patient-physician relationship and therapeutic counter itself to be an inherently potent and sufficient to promote healing. And a close working, empathetic relationship is highly valued by these patients and considered to enhance the effects of their therapy. These practitioners tend to see fewer patients and spend significantly more time, upwards of 3 times as long than do conventional physicians, which contributes to patient perceptions of acupuncture being more personalized and individualized than conventional biomedical approaches. There's a high degree of communication and collaboration between these agents, and acupuncturists are many times likened to counselors by the participants in the study. Empathy in the clinical context has been described as the ability to communicate an understanding of a patient's world and to act on that understanding in a therapeutic way. And this is a crucial component of that healing relationship. This empathetic relationship also functions to enable and empower the patient, which is highly associated with better self-reported outcomes. In biomedical research conducted on acupuncture, they've used a procedure entitled sham acupuncture as placebo control. Sham acupuncture differs from true acupuncture in that either the needles do not penetrate the skin or they are placed in points along the body other than traditional placement techniques. Treatment is said to be clinically meaningful if it outperforms a placebo, but biomedical reports regarding acupuncture and placebo have been contradictory. Traditionally, it is understood that a certain amount of deception is necessary when utilizing placebos within research, but this may prove to be a faulty assumption. A recent Harvard study has shown that placebos still exert a significant improvement rating when the participant is aware they are taking a placebo. This indicates there's something else going on, and much more to the placebo than biomedicine has revealed. In this way, placebos can be clinically meaningful outside of research frameworks. And through this understanding, the placebo effect can be a measure of the clinical encounter itself and the patient's experience within that context through both environmental cues and learning processes that occur in that context. The clinical encounter encompasses the terminologies, aesthetics, relationships, bodily and sensory experiences, expectations, and interpersonal discourse involved within the experience of medical therapies. Within CAM modalities, these function to frame the encounter as holistic and therapeutic, something these participants saw as antithetical to biomedicine. For example, an interesting finding of this research was the fact that 5 of the 11 participants in this study used the term non-invasive to describe acupuncture therapy. Whereas this seems contradictory to the physical practice of acupuncture itself, these participants have learned about, interpreted, and framed notions of acupuncture in a certain manner so as to make this association possible. Sensations delivered from acupuncture treatments are not intrinsically pleasurable, but it is through interpretation that they become contextualized, assessed, and henceforth gain meaning for that patient. Much like Becker's study on deviance, people's perceptions of a behavior or practice function fluidly in a developmental process. This process of learning could account for patients' perceptions of acupuncture becoming more positive over the course of treatment, along with the finding that among these participants, 4 have likened their experience with acupuncture to a day at the spa. So as stated previously, there was a common theme of dissatisfaction with Western medicine among the participants. Their participation in CAM and preference for holistic forms of medicine serves as a cultural critique of biomedicine, and the agency shown among these individuals in their healthcare decisions renders them as medical consumers instead of passive patients within that system. So why should we care? An increasing number of people who seek CAM therapies are seeking relief from chronic conditions and the associated side effects of pharmaceuticals. It has long been noted that Western medicine has fallen short in its management of chronic conditions, and currently 1 in 4 Americans suffers from moderate to severe chronic pain. And with the general aging of the population, the statistic is projected to rise. Despite the fact that Americans already consume over half the world's pharmaceuticals, and iatrogenic deaths are the 3rd leading cause of death in the nation. The United States is the only developed nation within the world without universal health care, and despite the introduction of the Affordable Care Act, many citizens still will go without health care, be unable to afford these expenses. The U.S. spends more on health care than any other country, but what we get for these significant resources falls short in terms of access to care, affordability, and quality. And individuals with higher incomes experience greater satisfaction with their health care than individuals with lower incomes. CAM therapies are both safer and cheaper than biomedical treatments, and then within this research, they have shown themselves to be critically meaningful. Work should continue on how best to incorporate these approaches within healthcare to ease dissatisfaction and dehumanization experienced by these medical consumers.
you get acupuncture yourself?
I didn't want to taint my observation.
Are you going to get it now?
It's relevant.
You mentioned Becker's theory of deviance, and I'm wondering how you see acupuncture as deviant.
I don't. Basically what I was saying is that people's perceptions of it are built within this like really fluidic space. And people, I've experienced some of my participants talking about how, nothing happened at first, and then they learned to like reinterpret it. So it's just that process of like being able to reinterpret and kind of looking at like what factors lie in that process.
Did you look at data that showed if there's a certain geographic area where acupuncture clinics are more prevalent?
It is more prevalent in the West. A lot of that is because acupuncture wasn't really, well, it definitely wasn't legislated, but it was even outlawed in many places. And there was a big community within San Francisco and Chinatown of people practicing, and yeah, people out west.
So I didn't hear as much voice, so I was kind of curious about what your informants had to say about the sense of detachment that people often talk about when it comes to Western biomedicine, right? You had mentioned a little bit about, non-empathetic approaches in Western biomedicine. Did you have informants talk about how that's different in acupuncture, where there's more of a closeness, there's this kind of hands-on experience getting into that process of feeling like it was more empathetic or that it was approached differently?
I had one woman that really stuck out to me. She was an old firecracker. She has been suffering with fibromyalgia for a number of years. And fibromyalgia is kind of in this weird place. Like, some people see it as, it's a contested illness to some degree. It's becoming more and more accepted. But when she was suffering really badly, she just said she was tested over and over again. She was poked and prodded. She was made to lay down. It was a process of exclusion, basically, that they diagnosed her with fibromyalgia. And through that process of exclusion, she was like run through the gambit. And she said she never developed any sort of relationship with any of those doctors. She couldn't even tell you what their names were. And a lot of that was her jumping around, just wanting to find closure and wanting a diagnosis. And when she tried acupuncture, she found that the acupuncturist cared about her family and how she was doing with that. And even though she still experienced this chronic pain, she was able to have a better relationship with her family. And she attributed that to the care that the acupuncturist took in the treatment. So treating her like a rotten piece of meat, she said.
One of the interesting points is that you said for these people that aesthetic experience can't be really separated from the rest of it. And you said the aesthetic experience indexed to them sort of either being spa or something esoteric, right? So what is it about, how is that aesthetic experience constructed for them? I've never been to an acupuncturist.
Your wife has.
What? Yeah.
And you mentioned that episode of Portlandia.
Yeah, which is a very not aesthetic experience.
Yes. How do the patients construct?
Yeah. Or how does the acupuncture specialist construct what is seen as a meaningful and curative aesthetic experience for them?
A lot of the participants talked about how there was incense in the acupuncture clinics and like certain aromatherapies that I guess was different from, I don't know, formaldehyde or whatever they could experience somewhere else. And there was a lot of more soft lighting, more gentle lighting, and and they just said that overall it was a more relaxing environment for them, and whatever factors they used to feel relaxed, they got that there, and that was something they saw as completely contrasted to their experience in normal clinics where there was like harsh fluorescent lights, and they were like, I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror in that clinic. And a lot of them said, yeah, they just like wanted to like relax and go to sleep, and they got an acupuncture clinic, much like a new age spa therapy. I guess I'll answer it later. Thank you.